He is the single most feared and hated man on the battlefield. He can kill with a single shot from nearly a mile, or creep within yards of an enemy target, remaining virtually invisible. If detected, he is always outgunned. If captured, he is often killed. He is the ultimate marked man. Meet the sniper, next on Dangerous Missions. These are the United States Marine Corps' elite scout snipers. With a single 30-cent bullet, they can wreak as much havoc as an artillery barrage or a bombing raid. In a world of cutting-edge technology and push-button war, these snipers preserve the art of patiently creeping into hostile territory, often within yards of a heavily armed opponent, to deliver the single shot that can destroy an enemy. The risks are enormous. To perform this dangerous job, these men must train constantly, readying themselves to fight any enemy and learning how to blend into any terrain. As select, rigorously trained professionals, the snipers are revered by their comrades and prized by their commanders for the hazardous job they perform. But it wasn't always so. In the early 18th century, when accurate long rifles joined muskets as the standard armament of the foot soldier, there emerged a solitary warrior. He lurked in the shadows on his own, waiting patiently to deliver a precise shot. He was called a sniper, named for his ability to hit the snipe, a nimble game bird hunted by British soldiers. These early snipers could cut down the enemy from ranges up to 300 yards, truly representing death without warning. From the beginning, the psychological impact of the sniper triggered a ferocious response.
The worst thing that can happen to a sniper is if he's detected. All hell is going to come down on him. There is going to be no mercy. Everything that can be brought against him will be brought against him. All the hate that possibly can be engendered against an enemy will be engendered against the sniper.
This rage at the sniper's ability to kill without warning virtually doomed shooters who fell into enemy hands.
It was revenge. It became very personal. A sniper war is a personal war, and because of that, it is extremely dangerous. When a sniper fires, he stirs up a hornet's nest.
At the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775, the life expectancy of a sharpshooter depended strongly on his ability to sprint to safety. In spite of the risks, the covert marksmen soon proved their ability to twist the fate of a battle on a single bullet. The sharpshooter's unconventional tactics outraged the British.
They also considered them bushwhackers and murderers because they didn't stand up in the European massed ranks across the field and shoot point blank at you like they wanted to.
Troops in the Continental Army did not look upon their own sharpshooters with much more favor. They cringed at the notion of assassins in their ranks. Nevertheless, at the outbreak of the American Civil War, neither side hesitated to unleash the lethal potential of the sniper. In the North, a firebrand named Colonel Hiram Berdan held an open call, urgently searching for the sharpest Union shots.
He approached the Secretary of War and offered to raise an entire regiment of nothing but target shooters, long-range rifle shooters, who could bring such devastatingly accurate mass fires to bear that surely the Civil War would be over in a matter of months.
When these companies of Berdan sharpshooters began taking aim at Confederates, it was often through some of the first optical scopes. These simple telescope-like devices magnified the target to a power of 2 or 3. Across the battle lines, Southern snipers, wielding prized British Whitworth rifles, soon had Union troops cowering as well. At the Battle of Spotsylvania in 1864, Union General John Sedgwick was desperate to demystify the sniper as his men massed to attack.
So he went forward to their position, stood in the open, and said, "Listen, gentlemen, why they couldn't hit an elephant at this he didn't finish the word distance. A long-range Whitworth slug struck him below the left eye, and he dropped dead. One shot, one man."
It was a shot heard round the world. In Germany, Prussians did not let the sniper's controversial reputation stop them from embracing this dark art of war. Half a century later, with the advent of World War, their foresight was brutally apparent. By the end of 1914, the early offenses of World War I had bogged down, leaving both sides to dig in for the bloody stalemate of trench warfare. With most infantry tactics rendered useless by the terrain, Germany unleashed a weapon that could reach the enemy deep within his protective trenches. Thousands of trained snipers with optically scoped Mauser rifles prowled silently along the trenches and into the craters of no man's land. Soon they were taking a murderous toll on the unprepared British.
It got so bad that it was almost suicidal to even poke your head above a trench. The British developed a rifle that fit into a special frame that could be held up over the top of a trench, and attached to the rear was a periscope.
However, Brit gunners found little to shoot at through their periscopes. The Germans quickly raised camouflage to an art form.
The Germans developed hollowed-out trees made of steel that perfectly matched a real tree in no man's land, except now it had a hidden sniper post inside.
In a rare departure from their quest for stealth, German snipers at one point became so bold as to openly crawl forward behind steel plates. But when British armor-piercing elephant guns reached the trenches, the early practitioners of this brazen approach could be found rotting behind their punctured shields. British fortunes also improved with the arrival of their own sniper squads, allowing them to finally fight fire with fire. Among their best were a collection of rugged Scotsmen with a knack for concealment.
They had recruited some of the best stalkers in the world out of Lavat's scouts. A lot of them were Scottish gameskeepers who'd worked for Lord Lavat in Scotland. And for catching poachers on the Lord's land, they developed this camouflage suit called a ghillie suit.
A ghillie suit was a net that you could put over yourself with various bits and pieces of cloth hanging off of it that would break up your outline.
Lurking unseen in their own hides, British snipers used their scoped .303 caliber infield rifles to exact a bloody revenge on the German trenches. By late 1917, American snipers had arrived at the front, bringing their Springfield Model 1903 rifles to bear on the Germans. Inspired by Harold McBride, a skilled U.S. shooter who had served with the Canadians for much of the war, the American snipers quickly absorbed the deadly tricks of the trade from ally and enemy alike. After the war, they returned home expecting to instruct future American snipers, but were shocked at the reception they received.
Snipers were considered not the Gary Cooper, march down Main Street, heads up, shoot him in the face type soldier. They were the guys that hid in the shadows, that hid behind the rubble, that hid in the trees and shot you in the back or bushwhacked you. And so therefore, most of your mainstream military officers and politicians frowned on them.
With the end of the war to end all wars, all training and development of U.S. sniping was forcibly abandoned. It was a decision which would come back to haunt American troops. In early 1943, American troops struggled to gain a foothold against savage Japanese opposition in the Pacific. The cost of each island assault was measured in the thousands of dead that lined the beaches. Battling their way into the jungles, the GIs confronted an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered.
The Japanese sniper often found himself in a suicide job. They had steel hooks that they put on their boots to climb, like coconut and palm trees with, and they would climb up in these trees and they would tie themselves into the trees and sometimes wait up there for days on end for some unfortunate victim to walk by someplace below them. And because of that, there was no route of escape.
In one case during the Wunda campaign, U.S. Marine Corps chaplain was called to the front because a wounded Marine was hollering, "Please, for God's sake, send the Padre, send the Padre." A couple of Marines tried to warn him, but he went forward anyhow. It was a Japanese sniper.
In the early campaigns of the war, these cunning killers had to be taken out at great risk by normal infantrymen. Trained American snipers who could surgically dispatch their Japanese counterparts were in critically short supply.
By the beginning of World War II, what we found out is that we had dropped the ball. We let the whole program fall through the cracks from World War I, and the only way that we had any snipers at all is because we had marksmanship programs in which scoped rifles had been used.
A sniper school was hastily created at Green's Farm near San Diego, California. The weapon of choice was again the Springfield Model 1903 bolt-action rifle. The large new uninertal scope on top made it much more accurate than the World War I Springfield.
This 1903 Springfield was an excellent rifle. It was equipped with a 10-power scope on a slide mount. In other words, you had to slide the scope forward in order to operate the bolt.
On the training ranges at Green's Farm and other sniper schools, candidates quickly learned to make kills at 700 yards or more. However, in light of the urgent shortages at the front, many rifle companies were forced to create their own snipers right on the spot.
We found ourselves in a situation, without formal schools, of having sergeants go out and pick men and hand them sniper rifles and say, "Come with me, boy, you're going to be a shooter." And all of a sudden they found themselves with a bolt-action rifle in a machine gun war.
For a Marine rifleman in the Pacific, the honor of being designated as sniper was an ominous one. For the first time, they were asked to venture out in teams of 2 to scout enemy positions beyond the front lines. The hazardous new job was termed Scout Sniper. Daniel Cass found his training put to the test as an 18-year-old Marine Scout Sniper facing the Japanese at Okinawa.
The dangerous part would be to be caught out there alone, and somebody sneak up on you and not know that they're there. Well, with no effective firepower at all, why you could be in a deep bunch of trouble in a hurry.
Exposed and outgunned, the snipers found that a breakneck retreat was often the only means of survival.
The inherent dangers to the sniper were exhibited when you had the 5th Army snipers suffering 80% casualties on the battlefield. And the 24th Marine Division, out of the original 24 snipers, only had 9 left after the Battle of Iwo Jima.
D-Day, June 6, 1944. The Allies stormed the beaches at Normandy, France. Once inland, the green snipers of the U.S. Army faced a lethal challenge. Within the thick hedgerows lurked hundreds of elite German snipers.
The Germans had a very concerted sniper program. They had a well-established sniper school outside of Berlin run by Major Konings, who was one of their top-rated snipers. They kept all of their training and all of their knowledge from World War I, and they re-employed it in World War II.
The scoped Mauser Model 98 could send an 8mm slug into an enemy half a mile away. However, with the Germans' mastery of camouflage and decoys, the Nazi sniper could creep in silently to deliver sudden death from short range. In the Allied march toward Berlin, the sheer might of the American and British war machine doomed many a German sniper as they blasted away at their hiding places. But it was only on the frozen Eastern Front in the war with Russia that the Nazi sniper met his equal, one-on-one. In 1941, in the face of the brutal German mechanized advance, Russia had called on her peasant warriors to save her from extinction. Propaganda reels loudly exalted the triumphs of the lonely Soviet sniper who fought a one-man or one-woman war against the Nazi invaders. Stories of sharpshooters such as Lyudmila Pavlyuchenkov, with more than 300 kills to her credit, thrilled the Allies and enraged German commanders. When the Nazi advance stalled in the epic siege at Stalingrad in 1942, the fighting was house to house, from one brick pile to the next.
Things had so bogged down that anybody on either side, ordinary infantry who exposed themselves, was going to be shot by a sniper. The Germans were concentrating snipers there, the Russians were concentrating snipers. It became a sniper's battle.
New Soviet marksmen learned to shoot their Mosin Nagants on rifle ranges inside bombed-out factories within earshot of the fighting.
They would set up a range and paint targets on the wall. These young men would shoot at these targets, and when they could hit enough of them, they put them out on the streets.
However, not all the Red Army snipers were as untested. Within the rubble, one man's name struck terror into the hearts of German soldiers. No Soviet sniper was more feared than Vasily Zaitsev.
He was employed in the Battle of Stalingrad on the street fighting there, and within 10 days racked up a body count of 40 Germans. Well, the Soviet press got a hold of this, and they touted it far and wide, and of course the Germans read it. And when they did, this incensed them. They in turn sent their premier sniper, Major Konings, from the sniper school outside of Berlin, to Stalingrad for the sole purpose of killing Vasily Zaitsev for their own propaganda machine to show that the Germans were better.
He probably would have gotten away with it, except a German POW was captured, and he boasted to the Russians that they can shoot their mouths off of Zaitsev all they want. He's a dead man. It's only a matter of days. Immediately, of course, this was relayed to Zaitsev, and the word was out to all Russian snipers. Watch, there's a specialized German, the best sniper the Germans have, and he's hunting for Zaitsev. For several days, they didn't know where he was, and then in a single day, they lost 3 Russian snipers in a particular small section of front. So Zaitsev realized that's where he was.
Moving deftly, with a hunter's caution, Zaitsev closed to the block where Konings had claimed the 3 snipers. After countless kills, the 2 deadliest snipers alive were within yards of each other. But only one would come out alive. In the dead of winter 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad came to a standstill as the premier snipers of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany locked in an epic duel. Within a bombed-out block of buildings, Vasily Zaitsev and Walter Konings waited patiently for the other to make the first mistake. On both sides, troops waited anxiously for a victor.
It's distilled war. It's man against man, not knights sitting there with jousting or fighter pilots doing that, but 2 guys sneaking around trying to shoot each other.
On the second day, there was a political commissar that went out with Zaitsev because he wanted to see this and he wanted to make a big deal out of it. And he saw something move down the street. And when he did, he stood up and he pointed and he said, "That's him, I see him."
But before Zaitsev could even warn him, a shot dropped him. He was exposed for perhaps 1 second. Zaitsev understood now that had to be Koenig because the shot was too well placed and too quickly fired.
Zaitsev peered in the direction from which the shot had come, but dismissed most hiding spots as too obvious for the likes of Konings. Focusing his sight on a steel plate in the rubble, Zaitsev played a hunch.
Zaitsev took his glove off, he put it on his stick, and he raised it up. Konings shot the glove, and when he did, they saw where the muzzle flash came from, back in the dark under that piece of metal. Zaitsev immediately put a round right in the center of that small triangular dark spot, and it went through Koning's face and out the back of his head.
Unlike many Soviet snipers, Zaitsev survived the war to receive a hero's acclaim. However, in the United States, sniping remained stigmatized. In the wake of VJ Day, all sniper training was once again purged from the armed services. But by 1950, America was back at war. When combat in Korea became an arduous hill-to-hill campaign, U.S. commanders once again were forced to cobble together a sniper training program from scratch. Ordinary foot soldiers were again pressed into service as snipers and rearmed with the ageless Springfield Model 1903, or a scoped version of the venerable M1 Garand rifle. By the latter half of the conflict, U.S. Army and Marine snipers encountered conditions similar to those of World War I, operating as lone sharpshooters in the middle of a grim stalemate. Many performed bravely in the face of terrifying human wave attacks by North Korean and Chinese communist troops. Although support for snipers again vanished with the ceasefire, their exile would be a short one. In 1965, America threw the full weight of her modern arsenal against North Vietnam. Despite the massive destruction delivered by B-52s and helicopter gunships, U.S. forces were confounded by an enemy who could defeat technology with cunning and stealth. When high-tech firepower proved no substitute for low-tech guile, snipers were again rushed to war. However, in the earliest days of the conflict, scoped precision rifles were few and far between. Some Marine shooters went into combat armed with Winchester Model 70 game rifles. The scopes for many of these had been hastily purchased in sporting goods stores in Okinawa. Marine Captain Edward J. Land was among the first sniper commanders to reach Southeast Asia in 1965.
Captain Land, when he got to Vietnam, knew that the best way to find out how to train snipers was to take his people out, find the enemy, and then engage them with sniper-type weapons.
From Hill 55 south of Da Nang, Land trained and accompanied the young scout snipers in his platoon into combat. Their job was to operate in teams of two. The sniper was now paired with a spotter, who directed his fire to deliver kills from distances up to a mile. For many, the first challenge was to confront the personal nature of a war waged through a 10-power scope.
When you see the target that you're going to take, the one thing that you notice first is that the target has eyes.
You know you're going to kill some mother's son. At that time, some people can't do it.
By 1966, hundreds of Marine Scout sniper teams patrolled the mountains and rice paddies that dotted the northern regions of South Vietnam. Further south, their Army counterparts prowled the forbidding jungles of the Central Highlands and the Mekong Delta. But while the Army opted for concentrated firepower and kept its snipers close at hand, the Marines set their scout snipers loose. Chuck Mawhinney was only 19 when he made his first kill as a scout sniper.
The most dangerous thing anytime is leaving the unit. Anytime you leave that unit, you're facing everything. You're facing not just the environment, you're facing the booby traps. Charlie, you don't know who the enemy is for sure, so you can't trust the village people, you can't trust anybody.
Because of that, any mistake at all, and that sniper wouldn't come home. You're out in the middle of all of the Indians, and you're Custer without a regiment.
I had the feeling after the first few firefights, knowing the longevity and the time I was going to be there, that I really honestly didn't think I probably would come back alive.
In the face of the long odds and staggering firepower massed against them, the sniper teams raced to update their tools and tactics to suit a guerrilla war. To maximize the psychological impact, specific targets were cleverly selected. When North Vietnamese who lugged the cumbersome mortar platforms became regular victims of sniper bullets, volunteers for the task became impossible to find. Starlight scopes, specialized early night vision devices, allowed the scout snipers to make accurate kills in pitch black as well. Soon, the American snipers were beating the Viet Cong guerrillas at their own game, delivering terror out of thin air. Concealed in tall grass along a riverbank, Chuck Mawini waited patiently until a heavily armed North Vietnamese rifle company filled his scope.
As it happened, here they come across the river. And there was probably 30 in the river at one time. They were fairly close together, carrying their gear. When I pulled the trigger, the first one was just starting up the bank on the other side. And I pulled the trigger 16 times that night, rapid succession. 16 NVA floated down the river.
With the escalation of the war in Vietnam, the ability of U.S. snipers to inflict chaos on the enemy with a handful of bullets made them a prized asset. As word of their prowess spread, an old stigma was given new life.
When I was in Vietnam, the unit that I employed was referred to as Murder Incorporated by the other Marines.
Ron Spahn served 2 tours in Vietnam, the second as a Marine sniper.
The reputation precedes you. You hear eventually that these guys are loners, these guys are ruthless, these guys will kill their own mother.
Feared by their own troops, the snipers were demonized by the enemy. Surrender for a sniper became unthinkable.
A sniper would be almost immediately killed if he were captured. There's very little chance of survival for the sniper because of the fear that he instills in the enemy.
The enemy detests you, and his first instinct is to kill you. His second instinct is perhaps to interrogate you, torture you, drain you of whatever kind of intelligence he can, and then kill you. Surrender is not an option.
I always thought if I got captured, remember that 45 I told you I carried? That last round was mine. Because I knew what was going to happen to a sniper if they caught him.
By late 1966, the scout sniper's impact had earned them a lethal honor. Viet Cong bounties were placed on the heads of individual shooters. For the rest of the war, the hunter would be the hunted. The success of American snipers brought sudden attention to these solitary soldiers. Stories of single-handed exploits and impossible shots circulated among the troops. At Hill 55, a legend was born. Carlos Hathcock had been an early student at the sniper school run by Edward Land. A country boy from Arkansas, Hathcock combined championship shooting skills with an uncanny feel for the outdoors.
All of us developed an edge, a sixth sense, if you will, in the way we operated. But Carlos took it a step further and became truly just part of the environment. Every breeze, every insect, every bird, every smell meant something to him.
In 1966, Hathcock's bullets began wreaking havoc on enemy troops. Over 3 days in the remote Elephant Valley, Hathcock and his spotter, acting alone, decimated an entire North Vietnamese company. Assuming that they were under attack by dozens of U.S. troops, the NVA never counterattacked. During one treacherous helicopter insertion deep into enemy territory, Hathcock inched his way across a snake-infested meadow before terminating a North Vietnamese general within his own base camp. As tales spread of Hathcock's deadly prowess, an American newspaper article exposed him as the enemy never could.
What happened was one of our public affairs officers gave him media group a story about Carlos. It was published, and then they became aware of who Carlos and myself were and some of the other members of the team. It was at that point that Carlos and I both had a bounty put on our head, and a North Vietnamese sniper was sent down to kill Carlos.
The best sniper that they had was sent south to kill him and was out there. Now, this sniper, by this time, had killed some Marines on Hill 55. He'd made his presence known. It was a challenge.
Rising to the threat, Carlos and his spotter was soon in the bush, shadowing their would-be assassin.
And for 2 days, they tracked this guy. Now, by this time, they called him the Snake Eater or the Cobra Sniper.
When a shot pierced his spotter's canteen, Carlos realized that the Cobra was within range. Like Vasily Zaitsev decades before, Hathcock patiently maneuvered, waiting for the slightest mistake by his nemesis. Late that afternoon, Carlos's restraint was rewarded.
The sun glinted off his lens of the scope, I guess. But I saw the glint. I shot it where the glint was. And it just happened to be the right time. And by looks of things, I was just the quickest on the trigger, otherwise they'd kill me. How do I know he would have killed me? Because I shot right through his scope, right straight through the scope, didn't touch the side.
Ironically, it was not a bullet that ended Hathcock's war. On September 16, 1969, the Amtrak personnel carrier on which he was riding struck a mine. The initial blast threw him clear of the vehicle.
Flames were everywhere. And Carlos, instead of just abandoning and trying to, get away from the Amtrak, instead got inside and started throwing Marines out, throwing Marines off the roof.
The Amtrak uses gasoline, and soon after Carlos had thrown the Marines off and was looking to see if anyone had fallen inside the Amtrak, it exploded.
Carlos was evacuated with third-degree burns over nearly half his body. It would take many months and countless skin grafts to make even a partial recovery. Due to a military oversight, it would take nearly 30 years for him to receive the Silver Star for his bravery. Although Hathcock's rifle was silenced, the North Vietnamese fear of the sniper endured. Throughout the war, other U.S. shooters would find a price on their own heads.
I was called in the company commander's tent one afternoon, and I was advised that I was a marked man. There was a reward on my head. And the captain said, obviously you guys are doing your job. You try to become more aware that you're a marked target. Someone has a bounty on your head. Wouldn't take too much going through a village for somebody to come up and shoot you. Take your rifle and take off. That added, obviously, to the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a sniper.
Near the end of his second combat tour in 1966, Spahn saw action in the fierce clashes with North Vietnamese divisions at Chu Lai.
Those week-long operations were so intense. It came to the point where my mind blocked out a lot of my personal shooting of the enemy. I still cannot recollect to any certainty what I did. I can assume there were youngsters, children, older folks, perhaps mistaken as being troops.
14 years later, Ron was a successful police officer in New Jersey when he cornered a heavily armed suspect.
And I couldn't shoot the fellow. And it was a law enforcement dream. There was a crime, there was a shooting, there was a gun, it was the sort of perfect image where if you had to kill somebody in the line of duty, this is the way you want to do it. And I just couldn't shoot this fellow.
The standoff ended when the suspect dropped his gun. But a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder ended Ron's career in law enforcement. As part of his recovery, he returned to Vietnam to make peace with his past. Chuck Mawhinney survived his 16 months as a scout sniper and returned to a career with the Forest Service. Always modest about his service, his unsurpassed total of 108 confirmed kills was only recently recognized by the Marine Corps. His Remington 700 rifle was tracked down, still in service after 30 years.
The rifle's been taken back out of service and returned to its original condition as the way I carried it, with the same scope now, the same green 3-9 Redfield scope. And someday they're gonna, I believe, place it in a museum, in the Marine Corps Museum.
Another legacy to the sniper's war in Vietnam was pioneered by Edward Land and Carlos Hathcock. Before leaving the Marine Corps in the mid-1970s, the men successfully spearheaded the move to designate scout sniper as a full-time military occupation. Their influence also led to the birth of the first permanent sniper schools, training Marines at Camp Pendleton, California, and Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. This revolution in training would prove invaluable, as technology and politics soon conspired to challenge the modern sniper as never before. The art of war has given way to the science of war. Today, combat is marked by smart bombs, computers, and satellites. In the face of such technical advances, the life of the modern sniper still relies upon his oldest asset: absolute invisibility. On an ever-evolving battlefield, their dangerous mission remains unchanged. Advance as close to the enemy as possible without being detected, gather all available reconnaissance, then deliver one lethal shot.
Typical targets in combat really are the leaders of the battlefield, because if you break up the leadership of the enemy, they can't make decisions.
This little line here in the sand represents the road we're standing on.
Today's scout snipers, like these Marines in training at Camp Pendleton, California, prepare for the war of the future by perfecting the skills of the past.
So you're going to be coming downhill also, and the vehicle's slightly elevated, so make sure you keep that in mind.
When they do this for real, their lives will depend upon marksmanship, concealment, and stealth.
We really don't have that much firepower, so if we get compromised or anything like that, we'll be in a world of hurt, pretty much.
The training is rigorous. Each candidate is screened for specific traits.
He has to have the heart and the desire to carry on, where most people would quit or not be able to go on any further. He needs to, what we like to say, reach down, grab a hold, and keep on going. Intestinal fortitude, dedication is really what gets him through. He has to want to do it.
The washout rate at the Division Sniper School is 50%. The men who make it through will have to be able to cope with stresses unique to the sniper.
It does get more personal because you're almost out hunting. A lot of times, you can see them up close. You might be 400 or 500 yards away, but you can sometimes see the color of their eye, from a little bit closer. But you try not to think about it. It's a job.
The M40A1 is the Marine Scout Sniper weapon of choice. A direct descendant of the Remington Model 700 used in Vietnam, it can be used to hit a target beyond 1,000 yards. Laser rangefinders and the latest scopes help the sniper and his spotter direct fire with little chance of error. State-of-the-art night vision scopes and goggles allow them to penetrate the darkness more effectively than ever. The addition of the Barrett 50 caliber rifle with armor-piercing bullets allows the snipers to add vehicles to their list of prey. In spite of these advances, the perils of crawling alone into enemy territory remain unchanged from the earliest days of sniping.
Most dangerous moment for a scout sniper team, I would think, is as you're working near an enemy-held position and they are patrolling actively, having one of their security patrols come to within arm's reach of you sometimes. You know, you literally can feel your heart pounding, trying to pound its way out of your chest.
Although their missions are rarely reported on the nightly news, snipers have served with distinction in Beirut, Panama, and in the desert of Kuwait. In modern war, terrorists and warlords often conduct battles surrounded by innocent civilians. These conditions often make the surgical skills of the sniper the most viable weapon in a difficult situation. In 1993, in the midst of Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, 2 Army Black Hawk helicopters were shot down during a failed attempt to apprehend local faction leader Mohammed Adid. When the wounded survivors in one of the downed helicopters began taking fire from heavily armed gunmen, 2 Army Delta Force snipers, Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant Randall Shughart, volunteered to rope down from their helicopter to the wreck. Due to the extreme risk, their first 2 requests were denied by their commanding officer. Finally, following a 3rd request from Gordon and Shughart, the 2 men were given the go-ahead to drop from their helicopter, risking their lives to protect the wounded soldiers. During 2 hours of intense fighting, the snipers held off all attackers before running out of ammunition. Shughart and Gordon were eventually killed, but the pilot of the downed Black Hawk survived to return to his family. For their selfless act, Gordon and Shughart were posthumously awarded the first Congressional Medals of Honor bestowed since Vietnam. The medals, presented to their wives, were the first ever awarded to snipers. Their sacrifice also solidified the image of the sniper as a warrior of unsurpassed courage, willing to risk his life against overwhelming odds to protect his fellow soldier. It has been a role understood by snipers from the earliest days of war and on the bloodiest fields of battle. The sniper, outgunned and alone, will face an enemy obsessed with his destruction to deliver the single shot which can change battles and save lives.
There's no question in my mind that serving as a sniper in Vietnam and performing the way I did saved lives.
We viewed our role as protecting the infantry. Every enemy soldier we took out, every enemy soldier that we kept at bay, saved lives of our fellow Marines.
After centuries cloaked in mystery and fear, this legacy of solitary heroism has forged a newfound respect. The sniper has earned his place as one of the most revered men on the battlefield.